Officer Maria Rodriguez turned the key in her patrol car and felt the cool air blow against her face. It was going to be another hot day in the Arizona desert. The clock on her dashboard showed 6:30 in the morning, but she could already feel the heat building outside. Rex, her German Shepherd partner, sat in the passenger seat next to her. His black and brown fur was thick and shiny. His dark eyes watched everything around them with sharp attention. Rex had been working with Maria for 3 years now. He was smart, loyal, and had saved her life more than once. Maria checked her radio and equipment one more time. Today they would patrol Interstate 8, the long stretch of highway that ran through the Sonoran Desert near Yuma. This was dangerous country. The desert was huge and empty. People got lost here all the time. Some never made it out. The highway patrol had many jobs in this area. They watched for speeding cars and helped people whose vehicles broke down. They also looked for smugglers, who used the empty desert roads to move drugs and people across the border. It was serious work that required both Maria and Rex to stay alert. Rex turned his head toward Maria and made a small whining sound. She reached over and scratched behind his ears. "Good morning to you too, boy," she said softly. Rex's tail wagged. Once, then he turned back to watch the road ahead. Maria started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot at the highway patrol station. The sun was just coming up over the mountains in the distance. The sky was clear blue without a single cloud. It would be 115 degrees before noon. As they drove toward their patrol area, Maria thought about how much the desert had changed her life. She had grown up in Phoenix, where there were buildings and people everywhere. When she first came to work in this remote area, the silence and emptiness had scared her. Now she loved it. The desert was beautiful in its own way, but it was also deadly if you did not respect it. Rex suddenly sat up straighter and looked out the window. Maria followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. Just rocks, sand, and small desert plants stretching to the horizon. But Rex's instincts were better than hers. If he sensed something, she always paid attention. They reached their patrol section and began driving slowly along the highway. Most of the traffic was big trucks carrying goods between California and other states. A few cars passed by with families, going on vacation. Everything seemed normal and quiet. Around 8 in the morning, Maria stopped at a rest area to check on some travelers. An old man was having trouble with his car's engine in the parking lot. She helped him call a tow truck and gave him some water while they waited. Rex stayed by her side, watching the other people at the rest stop. After the tow truck arrived, Maria and Rex got back in their patrol car and continued down the highway. The temperature was rising quickly now. Heat waves shimmered off the black asphalt road. In the distance, mountains looked like they were dancing because of the hot air. Rex began acting restless again. He panted lightly and moved around in his seat. Maria wondered what was bothering him. She had learned to trust his feelings about things. Dogs could sense danger before humans could see it. Around 10:30, they came to a place where a dirt road crossed under the highway. Maria noticed something that made her slow down. There were tire tracks leading off the main road and into the desert. The tracks looked fresh, made sometime in the last day or two. She stopped the car and got out to look more closely. Rex jumped out too and immediately began sniffing around the tire tracks. The tracks were from a large vehicle, maybe a bus or big truck. They headed straight into the desert, away from any known roads or trails. This was strange. Most people who knew the desert would never drive so far from the highway without a very good reason. The tracks led toward an area that had no water, no shade, and no way to get help if something went wrong. Maria took some pictures of the tracks with her phone and wrote down the location in her notebook. She would report this when she got back to the station. It might be nothing, but it could also be important. Rex was still sniffing around the area. His nose was close to the ground as he followed a scent trail. Whatever he smelled seemed to make him excited and worried at the same time. His ears were up and forward and his tail was stiff. "What is it, boy?" Maria asked. "What do you smell out there?" Rex looked at her and then back toward the desert. He whined softly and took a few steps in the direction of the tire tracks. It was clear he wanted to follow the trail, but Maria decided they should stick to their regular patrol route for now. She called Rex back to the car. He came reluctantly, looking back over his shoulder several times. As they drove away, Maria could see him watching the desert through the rear window. The rest of the morning was quiet. They checked a few more rest areas and helped 2 different families with car trouble. The sun climbed higher and the heat became almost unbearable. Even with the air conditioning running, Maria could feel sweat on her forehead. Around noon, they stopped for lunch at a small diner near the highway. The owner, an old woman named Rosa, always saved scraps of meat for Rex. She had been running the diner for 20 years and knew all the highway patrol officers. "Hot one today," Rosa said as she brought Maria a cold drink and a bowl of water. "For Rex." "Sure is," Maria replied. "We saw some strange tire tracks earlier. Big vehicle went off into the desert near mile marker 47. Rosa frowned. "That's dangerous country out there. No water for miles. Why would anyone drive into that area?" Maria shrugged. "Could be anything. Maybe someone got lost. We'll keep an eye on it." After lunch, they continued their patrol. The afternoon was even hotter than the morning. The radio was mostly quiet except for routine check-ins with other officers. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. But Rex remained restless. Throughout the day, he kept looking toward the desert where they had seen the tire tracks. Maria began to wonder if they should have investigated more thoroughly. Rex's instincts had never been wrong before. As the day ended and they drove back toward the station, Maria made a decision. Tomorrow, if they had time, she would take Rex back to those tire tracks and let him follow his nose. Whatever was out there in the desert, Rex thought it was important. Neither Maria nor Rex knew that. At that very moment, 12 children were already in terrible danger, fighting for their lives in the brutal heat of the Arizona desert. The tire tracks they had found were just the beginning of a story that would test everything they had learned about survival, courage, and trusting each other. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Maria and Rex headed home, unaware that tomorrow would bring the most important day of their careers together. The old yellow bus pulled out of the church parking lot in Phoenix at 5:30 in the morning. 12 excited children pressed their faces against the windows, waving goodbye to their parents. They were going to summer camp in San Diego for a whole week. Janet Mills sat in the front seat behind the driver. She was a Sunday school teacher who had volunteered to help with the trip. The children loved her because she was always patient and kind. She had brought along plenty of snacks and games to keep everyone happy during the long drive. Tom Bradley sat in the back of the bus. He was the youth pastor at the church and had been working with these kids for 2 years. Tom was young and energetic. The children respected him because he always kept his promises and never talked down to them. The bus driver was an older man named Frank Garcia. He had been driving buses for 30 years and knew all the roads between Arizona and California. Frank was usually very careful and never took chances with children on board. As the sun came up, the children sang songs and played games. 8-year-old Emma Santos sat with her best friend Lucy near the middle of the bus. Emma was the youngest child on the trip, but she was brave and smart. She had been looking forward to this camp for months. 14-year-old Marcus Johnson sat with the older boys in the back. Marcus was tall for his age and often helped the younger children with things they could not reach. He was excited about the rock climbing and swimming activities planned for the week. The bus traveled west on Interstate 10 toward California. Everything was going perfectly. The children were happy, the weather was beautiful, and they would reach the camp by lunchtime. Around 9 in the morning, Frank saw signs warning about construction ahead. The highway would be closed for several hours while workers repaired a bridge. Frank had driven this route many times, but he had never seen this particular construction project before. "We need to take a different road," Frank told Janet. "The highway is blocked up ahead." Janet looked at her map. "How long will the detour take?" "Maybe an extra hour," Frank said. "There's a back road that goes around the construction. I've used it before." Frank took the next exit and began following signs for a detour route. But after driving for 20 minutes, he realized something was wrong. The signs seemed to be leading them away from the main highway instead of around the construction. The road became smaller and less traveled. Instead of other cars and trucks, they now saw only empty desert on both sides. Frank began to worry that he had missed a turn somewhere. "Are we lost?" Emma asked from her seat. No, sweetheart, Janet said with a smile. Mr. Frank knows exactly where we're going. But Frank was not as confident as Janet made him sound. He pulled over at a small gas station to ask for directions. The man behind the counter spoke little English and seemed confused about where Frank was trying to go. San Diego, the man said. Very far. You go wrong way. Frank bought a better map and spread it out on the counter. With the store clerk's help, he found where they were. They had somehow gotten onto a road that led toward the Mexican border instead of toward California. We need to go back, Frank told Janet when he returned. To the bus. I made a wrong turn somewhere. The children were getting restless. It was now 10:30 and they were supposed to arrive at camp by noon. Some of the younger kids were asking when they would get there. Tom Bradley moved to the front of the bus to talk with Frank and Janet. What's the situation? He asked quietly. We're about an hour off course, Frank admitted. But I know how to get back to the main road. Frank started the bus and began driving back the way they had come. But after 15 minutes, the engine began making strange noises. Steam started coming from under the hood. Oh no, Frank said under his breath. The temperature gauge on the dashboard was showing that the engine was overheating. Frank knew they had to stop immediately or the engine would be completely destroyed. He pulled the bus over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. They were in the middle of nowhere. There were no buildings, no other cars, and no cell phone service. What's wrong? Janet asked. The engine is too hot, Frank explained. We have to wait for it to cool down before we can drive anywhere. Frank got out and opened the hood of the bus. Steam poured out and he had to step back. The radiator was definitely overheating, but he could not tell why without letting everything cool down first. The children began asking questions. Some of them were scared because they had never been broken down in the desert before. Tom and Janet tried to keep everyone calm. It's just a small problem, Tom told the group. Mr. Frank will fix it and we'll be on our way soon. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that this was not a small problem. Frank discovered that the radiator had a leak. All the coolant had leaked out, which was why the engine had overheated. The bus had some water bottles, but not nearly enough to fill the radiator. Even if they could fix the leak, they would need several gallons of water to get the engine running again. By 11:30, the temperature outside was over 100 degrees. Inside the bus, it was even hotter because the air conditioning was not working without the engine running. The children were getting uncomfortable and asking for drinks. Frank, Janet, and Tom met outside the bus to discuss their options. They were at least 20 miles from the nearest town with no way to call for help. I could walk to find help, Janet suggested. I'm in good shape and I know which direction to go. Tom shook his head. It's too dangerous. The heat is getting worse every minute. But we can't just sit here, Frank said. These kids need air conditioning. Without it, this bus will become like an oven. Janet looked at the children through the bus windows. Some of them were already looking tired and hot. Emma was fanning herself with a piece of paper. I'm going to walk, Janet decided. I saw some buildings in the distance when we were driving, maybe 5 or 6 miles back. Tom did not like the idea, but he could not think of anything better. They were running out of options quickly. Take plenty of water, Tom told her, and be very careful. If you get tired or too hot, come back immediately. Janet gathered 2 bottles of water and told the children she was going to find help. She promised them she would be back soon with someone who could fix the bus. Take care of everyone, she told Tom. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Janet started walking back along the road they had traveled. The sun was directly overhead now and there was no shade anywhere. The heat made the air shimmer like water. Tom and Frank watched her until she disappeared around a bend in the road. Then they returned to the bus to try to keep the children comfortable. But as the afternoon wore on, the situation inside the bus became worse. The temperature climbed to over 110 degrees. The children were drinking their water quickly and beginning to feel sick from the heat. Frank tried everything he could think of to fix the radiator, but without proper tools and parts, it was impossible. They were stuck until help arrived. By 2 in the afternoon, Janet had been gone for 3 hours. There was no sign of her return, and no rescue vehicles had appeared on the road. Tom began to realize they might be in serious trouble. The children were showing signs of heat exhaustion. Some of them were getting headaches and feeling dizzy. Emma Santos, the youngest child, was having the hardest time. Her face was red and she was breathing heavily. Lucy, her best friend, was trying to fan her with a book. "Mr. Tom," Emma said weakly, "when is Miss Janet coming back?" Tom knelt down beside her seat. "Soon, honey. She'll be back with help very soon." But Tom was beginning to wonder if Janet had found help, or if something had happened to her in the brutal desert heat. Either way, he knew they could not wait much longer. The old bus sat motionless on the empty road, filled with 12 frightened children and 2 adults who were running out of ideas. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, and their situation was becoming more desperate with each passing hour. None of them knew that their only hope would come from an unexpected source: a police dog with keen instincts and a nose that could track scents across miles of desert wasteland. By 3 in the afternoon, the inside of the bus felt like a furnace. Tom Bradley wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the 12 children under his care. Their faces were red, and they were breathing hard. The youngest ones were beginning to look very sick. Emma Santos was no longer talking much. She just sat in her seat with her eyes half closed, trying to stay cool. Her friend Lucy was scared and kept asking when Miss Janet was coming back. Marcus Johnson, the oldest boy, had moved to sit near the younger children. He was using his baseball cap to fan little Emma, trying to help her feel better. But even Marcus was starting to look worried. "Mr. Tom," Marcus said quietly, "some of the little kids are getting really sick." Tom nodded. He had been watching the children carefully for the last hour. 3 of them were showing clear signs of heat exhaustion. Their skin was hot and dry, and they seemed confused and tired. Frank Garcia, the bus driver, had given up trying to fix the radiator. He sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the empty road. No cars had passed by in over an hour. It was as if they were completely alone in the world. "We can't stay here much longer," Frank said to Tom. "These kids need air conditioning or at least some shade." Tom looked out the bus windows at the desert around them. About half a mile away, he could see what looked like some large rocks. Maybe there would be shade there, and it would be cooler than inside the metal bus. But Tom also knew that leaving the bus was dangerous. If Janet came back with help, or if a rescue team came looking for them, the bus would be much easier to spot than a group of people hiding among rocks. "What do you think we should do?" Tom asked Frank. Frank was quiet for a long moment. He had been driving buses for 30 years, but he had never been in a situation like this before. "I think we need to get these kids out of this bus," Frank finally said. "If we stay here, some of them might not make it." Tom made the hardest decision of his life. Even though every safety rule said to stay with the vehicle, he could see that the children were in immediate danger from the heat. "Okay," Tom said. "Let's gather everyone up and head for those rocks over there." Tom stood up and faced the children. He tried to sound calm and confident, even though he was very scared inside. "Listen up, everyone," he said. "We're going to take a little walk to find some shade. It will be much cooler there than in this hot bus." Some of the children looked confused. They had always been taught to stay with the bus if it broke down. "But what if Miss Janet comes back?" asked Lucy. "We'll leave a note for her," Tom said. "She'll know where to find us." Tom and Frank gathered up all the water bottles they could find. There were only 6 bottles left and 12 children plus 2 adults. That was not nearly enough water for everyone. Frank wrote a note explaining where they had gone and taped it to the front window of the bus. He also left the hood of the bus open and put a bright orange safety vest on the roof, so rescuers could spot the bus from far away. Tom helped the children get off the bus. Emma Santos was so weak that Marcus had to help her walk. Several other children were stumbling and seemed dizzy. "Stay close together," Tom told everyone. "We're going to walk slowly and take breaks whenever anyone needs them." The group started walking across the desert toward the rocks. The sun was blazing overhead, and there was no wind at all. The ground was covered with small stones that made walking difficult. Within 10 minutes, Tom realized he had made a terrible mistake. The rocks that had looked close from the bus were actually much farther away than he had thought. The clear, desert air and bright sunlight had fooled his eyes, but it was too late to turn back now. Some of the children were already too tired to walk all the way back to the bus. They had to keep going forward and hope they could reach the shade before anyone collapsed. Emma Santos stopped walking after 15 minutes. She sat down on the ground and said she could not go any further. Her skin was very hot, and she was breathing in short, quick gasps. Tom picked Emma up and carried her. She was small for her age, but after a few minutes, Tom was sweating heavily and breathing hard. The heat was affecting him too. Marcus and 2 other older boys took turns helping carry Emma and the other younger children who were struggling. But this made the group move even more slowly. After walking for 30 minutes, they were still not halfway to the rocks. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. There were no landmarks to guide them, and the sun was so bright it was hard to see clearly. "I think we're lost," whispered one of the girls. Tom tried not to show his panic, but he was beginning to realize she was right. The rocks they were walking toward looked different from this angle. He was no longer sure they were heading in the right direction. Frank was carrying 2 of the younger boys now. His face was bright red and sweat was pouring down his cheeks. He was a big man who was not used to walking long distances in extreme heat. "We need to rest," Frank gasped. The group stopped in whatever small shade they could find from desert bushes and small rocks. Tom gave each child a small sip of water, but he knew their supply would not last much longer. Some of the children were crying now. They were scared, hot, and tired. The adventure that had started out so exciting that morning had turned into a nightmare. "When are we going home?" Emma asked weakly. Tom knelt down beside her. "Soon, sweetheart. People are looking for us right now. We just need to be brave a little bit longer." But Tom was not sure if that was true. Janet had been gone for over 4 hours now. If she had found help, someone should have come for them by now. Tom was beginning to worry that something bad had happened to her too. The group rested for 15 minutes, but Tom knew they could not stay in the open sun much longer. They had to find real shade or shelter somewhere. "Let's keep going," Tom said. "Those rocks aren't much further now." But as they continued walking, the rocks seemed to stay the same distance away. The heat was making the air shimmer and dance, which made it impossible to judge distances correctly. After another 20 minutes of walking, Frank collapsed. He had been carrying one of the children, and suddenly his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, breathing heavily. "I can't carry him anymore," Frank said. "I'm sorry." Tom realized that the adults were in just as much danger as the children. They were all suffering from heat exhaustion, and their judgment was becoming clouded. The group was now scattered across a quarter-mile area. The stronger children were still walking slowly forward, but the younger ones had fallen behind. Tom was running back and forth trying to keep everyone together. Emma Santos could no longer walk at all. She was semi-conscious, and her breathing was very shallow. Tom carried her to a small desert bush that provided a tiny bit of shade and gently laid her down. "Stay with Emma," he told Lucy. "Keep her in the shade and give her little sips of water." Tom looked around at the group of children and felt a crushing sense of responsibility and fear. They were lost in one of the most dangerous deserts in America. Their water was almost gone. The temperature was still rising. In the distance, the rocks they had been trying to reach looked just as far away as when they started. Tom realized they might never reach them. The children gathered around Emma in whatever shade they could find. They were scared and quiet now. Even the older boys had stopped trying to be brave. Marcus Johnson sat down heavily next to Tom. "Are we going to die out here?" he asked quietly. Tom put his arm around the boy's shoulders. "No," he said firmly. "People are looking for us. Someone will find us." But as Tom looked out at the vast empty desert surrounding them, he wondered if that was really true. They were like a few small dots in an area that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. The sun was beginning to move lower in the sky, but it was still blazing hot. Tom knew that desert nights could be very cold, which would create a whole new set of problems for the children. He tried to think of what to do next, but the heat was making it hard to concentrate. All he could do was try to keep the children together and hope that somehow someone would find them before it was too late. Miles away, Janet Mills was still walking along the desert road, not knowing that the children she was trying to save were now in even greater danger than when she left them. Janet Mills had been walking for over 4 hours in the blazing desert heat. Her water bottles were empty, and her lips were cracked and dry. The road seemed to stretch forever in both directions with no signs of civilization. She had started out, walking confidently, sure that she would find help within an hour or two, but the desert had fooled her just like it had fooled Tom and the children. Distances that looked short turned out to be much longer than expected. Janet's feet were covered with blisters from walking in shoes that were not made for hiking. My head was pounding from dehydration and heat exposure. Several times she had stopped and considered turning back, but she was no longer sure she could find her way back to the bus. The worst part was that she had not seen a single car or building since she started walking. The road she was following seemed to be completely abandoned. She began to wonder if it even led anywhere at all. Just when Janet was about to collapse from exhaustion, she spotted something in the distance. It looked like a small building with a tall metal tower next to it. As she got closer, she realized it was an old radio relay station that was no longer in use. The building was locked and empty, but the tall antenna tower gave Janet an idea. She pulled out her cell phone and checked for signal. Still nothing, but maybe if she could get higher up, she might be able to get a signal. Janet was afraid of heights, but she was more afraid of what would happen to the children if she did not get help soon. She began climbing the metal ladder on the side of the tower. Halfway up the tower, her phone suddenly showed 1 bar of signal. Janet's hands were shaking as she dialed 911. The call went through, but the connection was very weak and kept cutting out. 911, what is your emergency? The operator asked. This is Janet Mills, she said quickly, afraid the call would drop. I have 12 children stranded in the desert. Our bus broke down and they need help immediately. Can you repeat that? The connection is very poor. Janet spoke louder and slower. 12 children stranded in desert. Bus broke down. Need rescue immediately. What is your location? The operator asked. Janet looked around from her position on the tower. She could see for miles in every direction, but everything looked the same. There were no landmarks she could identify. I don't know exactly, Janet said, feeling panic rising in her chest. We were trying to get around construction on Interstate 10. We got lost and the bus overheated. Are you with the children now? No, I walked to find help. They're with the bus? Janet paused, realizing she was no longer sure which direction the bus was. The desert all looked the same from up here. The phone connection crackled and cut out for several seconds. When it came back, Janet could barely hear the operator. Ma'am, can you see any mile markers or road signs? Janet looked around desperately. In the distance, she could see the road she had been walking on, but there were no signs visible from this height. I can't see any signs, she said. Please, you have to help them. The children are in terrible danger. We're going to help you, the operator said. I'm dispatching search and rescue teams now. Can you stay on the line? The call dropped completely. Janet tried calling back several times, but she could not get a signal again. She climbed down the tower and sat in the small amount of shade next to the abandoned building. Janet knew she had to make a choice. She could try to find her way back to the children, or she could stay here where there was at least some shelter and wait for rescue teams to find her. But as she sat there, Janet realized with horror that she was not sure which direction she had come from. The desert looked the same in all directions. If she tried to walk back to the bus, she might get even more lost. Meanwhile, at the 911 dispatch center in Yuma, the operator was frantically trying to gather information about Janet's call. The connection had been so poor that many details were unclear. We have a report of children stranded in the desert, the dispatcher announced over the radio. Caller said 12 children, bus broke down, somewhere near Interstate 10. The search area was enormous. Interstate 10 ran for hundreds of miles through the desert, and there were dozens of side roads where a bus could have gotten lost. Within 30 minutes, multiple agencies were responding. The county sheriff's department, highway patrol, border patrol, and search and rescue teams all received the emergency call. Officer Maria Rodriguez and Rex were among the first units to respond. They had been patrolling near the area where Janet
made her call, though they did not know that yet. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, Maria radioed. We're familiar with this area."
There was construction on I-10 this morning that was forcing traffic onto detour routes. Copy that, Unit 47. Can you check the main detour route? Already heading there, Maria replied. As rescue teams spread out across the desert, the children, with Tom and Frank, were in increasingly desperate condition. Emma Santos had lost consciousness completely. Tom was holding her in his arms, trying to keep her in what little shade they could find. 3 other children were also showing signs of severe heat exhaustion. They were no longer sweating, which Tom knew was a very bad sign. Their bodies were running out of water and beginning to shut down. Frank Garcia was sitting with his back against a large rock, breathing heavily. The older man was suffering just as much as the children. His face was bright red and he seemed confused about where they were. "Mr. Tom," Marcus Johnson said weakly, "I think we're going to die out here." Tom looked at the boy who had been so strong and brave all day. Marcus was only 14 years old, but he had been helping take care of the younger children like an adult. Now even he was giving up hope. "No," Tom said firmly. "Help is coming. Miss Janet found people and they're looking for us right now." But Tom was no longer sure if that was true. Janet had been gone for over 5 hours now. If she had found help quickly, rescue teams should have arrived by now. The remaining water was down to just 1 bottle. Tom was giving tiny sips to the children who were in the worst condition, but he knew it would not last much longer. As the afternoon wore on, the search and rescue teams were covering hundreds of square miles of desert. Helicopters flew overhead looking for any sign of the missing bus or children. Search teams on the ground were checking every side road and dirt track in the area. But the desert was vast, and the bus could be anywhere within a 50-mile radius. 4 p.m., a helicopter spotted Janet at the old radio station. They landed and picked her up, rushing her to a medical center for treatment of heat exhaustion and dehydration. But when rescue workers questioned Janet about the location of the children, she broke down crying. The heat and stress had affected her memory. She could not remember exactly which roads they had taken or where she had left the bus. "I walked for hours," she told the search coordinator. "But I got lost. I don't know which direction I came from." The search teams now had one important piece of information. Janet had been found about 8 miles from the old radio station. The children were somewhere within walking distance of that location. But walking distance in the desert could still mean an area of several hundred square miles. And with each hour that passed, the children's chances of survival were getting smaller. As the sun began to set, search helicopters had to return to base because it was too dangerous to fly in the dark. Ground teams continued searching with vehicles and spotlights, but their progress was slow. Miles away, Tom Bradley held Emma Santos in his arms and whispered prayers for a miracle. The little girl was barely breathing. Around him, 11 other children were depending on him to somehow keep them alive through the night. None of them knew that at that very moment, Officer Maria Rodriguez and Rex were systematically checking every dirt road and trail in their search area. Rex's sensitive nose was picking up scents that human searchers would never notice. The race against time was about to take a dramatic turn. But first, the children would have to survive the longest night of their lives. Officer Maria Rodriguez received the emergency dispatch call at exactly 4:15 p.m. She was refueling her patrol car at a gas station when the urgent message came through her radio. "All units, we have a code red search and rescue situation. 12. Children missing in the desert. Last known location approximately 8 miles from the radio tower off Highway 78. Maria's blood ran cold. 12 children lost in this heat could quickly become a tragedy. She looked at Rex, who was already sitting up straight in the passenger seat. Somehow, he always seemed to know when they were about to face something serious. "You ready for this, boy?" Maria asked as she started the engine. Rex's ears were forward and alert. He made a small whining sound that Maria recognized as his way of saying he was ready to work. Maria turned on her emergency lights and siren and headed toward the search area at high speed. As she drove, she listened to radio updates from other search teams. Search Team Alpha, No sign of the missing bus on County Road 15. Air Unit 2, we've spotted some tire tracks heading northwest from mile marker 23, but they're too old to be from today. Ground Team 3, we found the woman who made the 911 call. She's being transported to medical, but she can't remember exactly where she left the children. Maria knew this was going to be a difficult search. The Sonoran Desert was enormous, and children could be hidden from view by even small hills or rock formations. When she reached the search area, Maria was assigned to Grid Section 7, which covered about 20 square miles of desert east of the radio tower. She would work systematically, checking every road and trail in that section. Rex seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. As they began their search, he kept his nose near the open window, constantly sniffing the air. For the first hour, they found nothing. Maria drove slowly along dirt roads that were barely more than tracks in the sand. Some led to abandoned mines. Others just ended in the middle of nowhere. At each stop, Maria would get out and call loudly, "Hello, can anyone hear me?" Rex would also get out and sniff around the area, but he showed no signs of picking up any human scents. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and Maria knew they were running out of daylight. If the children were not found before dark, their chances of survival would drop dramatically. Around 6 p.m., Maria was driving along a particularly rough dirt road when Rex suddenly became very excited. He started panting heavily and pawing at the window. "What is it, Rex?" Maria asked. Rex was focused on something outside that Maria could not see or smell. His whole body was tense with excitement, and he was making small whining sounds. Maria stopped the car and let Rex out. He immediately began sniffing the ground in wide circles, his nose close to the dirt. Then he lifted his head and sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring. After a few minutes, Rex sat down and looked directly at Maria. This was his signal that he had found something important. "Show me, boy," Maria said. Rex trotted about 50 yards, northeast of where they had stopped. Maria followed him and saw what he had found, tire tracks that were much fresher than anything else they had seen that day. Maria knelt down and examined the tracks closely. They were from a large vehicle, definitely big enough to be a bus, and they looked like they had been made that morning. "Good boy, Rex," Maria said, scratching behind his ears. "This could be it." Maria called in the discovery on her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We found fresh tire tracks in Grid Section 7. Large vehicle, possibly a bus. Tracks appear to be from this morning. Copy that, Unit 47. Can you follow the tracks?" Maria looked at the tracks stretching into the desert. They headed toward an area of low hills about 2 miles away. "Affirmative. We're following them now." As Maria got back in the car, Rex was more alert than she had ever seen him. His ears were up and forward, and he kept looking in the direction of the tire tracks. They drove slowly, following the tracks across the rough desert terrain. The tracks were easy to follow at first, but as they got into rockier ground, they became harder to see. After about a mile, the tire tracks led to an area where the ground was very hard and rocky. Maria lost the trail completely. She stopped the car and got out to look around. Rex jumped out too and immediately began sniffing in all directions. He seemed frustrated that the scent trail had become more difficult to follow. Maria was about to radio for assistance when Rex suddenly froze. His whole body went rigid and his ears perked up. He was staring toward a group of large rocks about half a mile away. "Do you hear something, boy?" Maria asked. Rex took a few steps toward the rocks, then looked back at Maria. He repeated this several times, clearly wanting her to follow him. Maria got her binoculars and scanned the area where Rex was looking. At first she saw nothing unusual, just rocks, sand, and small desert plants. Then she saw something that made her heart race. There was a faint reflection of light coming from behind the rocks. It could be sunlight reflecting off metal or glass. "That might be the bus," she whispered to Rex. Maria called dispatch immediately. "Unit 47 to dispatch. Possible sighting of the missing bus. Approximately 2 miles northeast of our last position. Requesting immediate backup." "Copy that, Unit 47. Air support and ground teams are being redirected to your location." Maria put Rex back in the car and drove as fast as she dared toward the rocks. The terrain was very rough and she had to weave between boulders and desert plants. As they got closer, Maria could clearly see that there was indeed a yellow school bus parked behind the rock formation. But something was wrong. The bus looked abandoned. There were no people around it. Maria parked about 100 yards from the bus and approached on foot with Rex beside her. She called out loudly, "Hello, this is the police. Is anyone there?" There was no answer. The bus was completely silent. When Maria reached the bus, she could see that the hood was open and there was a note taped to the front window. She read it quickly and her heart sank. The note was from Frank Garcia, the bus driver. It said, "Bus broke down, radiator leak. Took children to find shade at rocks to the northeast. Frank." Maria looked northeast from the bus and saw several different groups of rocks scattered across the desert. The children could be at any of them, or they might have gotten lost trying to reach them. Rex was sniffing around the bus excitedly. He had definitely found the scent trail he had been following. But now he seemed confused because the scent led away from the bus in multiple directions. Maria radioed the situation to dispatch. "Unit 47. We've found the bus, but it's abandoned. Note says they went looking for shade somewhere to the northeast. We need search teams to cover all possible locations." "Copy that. Teams are en route to your position." As Maria waited for backup to arrive, Rex continued sniffing around the area. He seemed to be trying to sort out which direction the children had gone. Suddenly, Rex's head snapped up and he looked toward a group of rocks about a mile away. His tail was rigid, and his ears were forward. Whatever he was sensing, it was making him very excited. Maria followed his gaze but could not see anything unusual. However, she had learned to trust Rex's instincts completely. If he thought the children were in that direction, she was going to investigate. "Come on, boy," she said. "Let's go find those kids." As they headed toward the rocks where Rex was leading, Maria had no idea that they were about to walk into a situation that was much more dangerous than just a search and rescue operation. The children were indeed in terrible danger, but not just from the heat and dehydration. Other people had found them first, and those people did not have rescue on their minds. Rex's nose had detected not just the scent of the missing children, but also the scent of strangers who were approaching the same area from a different direction. His instincts were telling him that something was very wrong, but he could not communicate the complexity of what he was sensing to Maria. All he could do was lead her toward the children as fast as possible, hoping they would arrive in time to prevent a disaster that was much worse than anyone had imagined. As Maria and Rex approached the area where Rex sensed the children might be, something else was happening that would change everything. A dirty white pickup truck was slowly driving through the desert from the opposite direction. The truck had been driving through the area for over an hour. The two men inside were not part of any rescue team. They were criminals who used the remote desert roads for illegal activities. Carlos Mendez was driving the truck. He was a thin man with dark hair and cold eyes. He had been arrested several times for smuggling people across the border, but he had always managed to avoid serious jail time. The passenger was a larger man named Pete Walker. Pete was mean and violent. He had spent 5 years in prison for kidnapping, and he was wanted by police in 3 different states. Carlos and Pete had been using this area to move stolen goods when they spotted something unusual in the distance. Through binoculars, they could see a group of people sitting in the shade of some rocks. "What do you think that is?" Pete asked. Carlos studied the group through the binoculars. "Looks like kids, maybe a dozen of them, with a couple of adults." "What are kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" Carlos lowered the binoculars and smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I don't know, but kids this far from civilization could be very valuable to the right people." Pete understood what Carlos was thinking. There were criminals who paid a lot of money for children, especially children who were already lost and might not be missed right away. "Let's take a closer look," Carlos said. Carlos drove the truck slowly toward the rocks where Tom and the children were resting. He was careful to approach from the side where they would be less likely to see him coming. Meanwhile, Tom Bradley was becoming increasingly desperate. Emma Santos had been unconscious for over an hour. 3 other children were also in very bad condition. Frank Garcia, the bus driver, was barely able to sit up. The children who were still conscious were gathered in whatever shade they could find from the rocks and desert bushes. They were quiet now, too tired and scared to talk much. Marcus Johnson, the oldest boy, was trying to be brave for the younger children, but even he was starting to lose hope. The sun was getting lower in the sky, but it was still blazing hot. "Mr. Tom," Marcus whispered, "do you really think someone is coming to help us?" Tom looked at the boy. Marcus deserved an honest answer. "I hope so," Tom said. "Miss Janet is smart and brave. If anyone can find help, she can." But Tom was no longer sure if that was true. Janet had been gone for over 6 hours now. Even if she had found help, it should not have taken this long for rescue teams to arrive. What Tom did not know was that rescue teams were already in the area. Maria and Rex were less than half a mile away and getting closer. But Carlos and Pete were also getting closer, and they would reach the children first. Carlos parked the truck behind a small hill where it would not be visible from the children's location. He and Pete got out and crept closer on foot. From their hiding place behind some rocks, Carlos and Pete could see the desperate situation clearly. The children were obviously in trouble from the heat. The adults with them looked just as bad. "This is perfect," Carlos whispered to Pete. "They're so weak they can't fight back or run away." Pete nodded. "And they're so far from anywhere that no one will find them for days." Carlos had a plan. He and Pete would approach the group and pretend to be rescuers. They would offer to help the children and load them into their truck. Once the children were in the truck, Carlos and Pete would have complete control over them. The two men walked out from behind the rocks and approached Tom and the children. Carlos put on his most friendly smile. "Hey there," Carlos called out. "Are you folks okay? We saw you from the road and thought you might need help." Tom looked up at the two men approaching. He felt a huge wave of relief. Finally, someone had found them. "Thank God," Tom said, struggling to stand up. "We've been stranded out here for hours. Some of these children are in really bad shape." Carlos and Pete walked closer. Carlos knelt down next to Emma Santos, who was still unconscious in Tom's arms. "This little girl looks very sick," Carlos said. "We need to get all of you out of this heat right away." "Do you have water?" Tom asked desperately. "And can you call for medical help?" "We have water in our truck," Pete said. "And we can drive you all to the hospital. It's not far from here." Tom felt like crying with relief. These men were going to save the children's lives. But Marcus Johnson was watching the two strangers carefully. Something about them made him uncomfortable. The way they looked at the children seemed wrong somehow. Carlos was studying the group, counting how many children there were. 12 kids and 2 adults who were too weak to cause problems. This was going to be easier than he had thought. "Our truck is just over that hill," Carlos said. "We can fit everyone if we squeeze together." Tom started trying to wake up the children who were sleeping or unconscious. "Come on, everyone. These nice men are going to help us get out of here." Most of the children were too tired and weak to question what was happening. They just wanted to get somewhere cool and safe. But as Carlos and Pete began helping the children stand up, Rex suddenly appeared on top of a nearby rock outcropping. The German Shepherd had been moving silently through the desert, following the scent trail that led to this exact location. Rex immediately sensed that something was wrong. His nose told him that these two men were dangerous. Their scent carried the smell of fear, violence, and deception. Rex let out a low growl and fixed his eyes on Carlos and Pete. Every muscle in his body was tense and ready for action. Carlos looked up and saw the police dog watching them from above. "Where did that dog come from?" he asked nervously. Pete reached slowly toward his belt where he kept a knife hidden under his shirt. "Just a stray dog," he said. "I can take care of it." But Rex was not just any dog. He was a trained police dog who had been searching for these exact children for hours, and his partner, Officer Maria Rodriguez, was only a few hundred yards away. Rex barked once loudly. It was a signal to Maria that he had found what they were looking for. Carlos and Pete looked at each other nervously. They had not expected to deal with a police dog. "We need to get these kids in the truck right now," Carlos whispered to Pete. But Tom was starting to notice that something was wrong too. The two men seemed more concerned about the dog than about helping the children. And why would good Samaritans be so nervous about a stray dog? Marcus stepped closer to Tom. "Mr. Tom," he whispered, "something doesn't feel right about these guys." Tom looked more carefully at Carlos and Pete. They were both sweating nervously and kept looking around as if they were afraid of being caught doing something wrong. Rex barked again, louder this time. He could smell Maria getting closer, but he could also sense that the two men were about to do something dangerous. Carlos made a decision. "Pete, grab as many of the kids as you can. We're leaving now." Pete started reaching for the nearest children, but Rex was faster. The German Shepherd leaped down from the rocks and landed directly between Pete and the children. Rex bared his teeth and growled menacingly. His message was clear. No one was going to hurt these children while he was there. "Get that dog away." "From me," Pete shouted, pulling out his knife. But Rex was trained for exactly this kind of situation. He crouched low and prepared to attack if either man made a move toward the children. In the distance, Maria heard Rex barking and knew he had found something important. She began running toward the sound as fast as she could across the rough desert terrain. The standoff had begun. Carlos and Pete were trapped between their desire to take the children and their fear of the police dog that stood between them and their victims. Tom finally understood what was happening. These men were not rescuers at all. They were predators who had found vulnerable children in the middle of nowhere. "Get away from us," Tom shouted, trying to gather the children behind him. But Tom was weak from heat exhaustion and could barely stand. The children were even weaker. Their only protection was a police dog and a police officer who was still minutes away. Rex held his ground, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether these children lived or died. Rex stood between the two dangerous men and the children, his muscles tensed and ready to fight. The German Shepherd's training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation, but he had never faced it with children's lives hanging in the balance. Carlos and Pete were getting desperate. They had expected to find weak, helpless people who would be grateful for any help. Instead, they were facing a police dog who clearly recognized them as threats. "We don't have time for this," Carlos hissed to Pete. "Just grab some of the kids and let's go." Pete still had his knife in his hand, but he was afraid to get too close to Rex. The dog looked like he would attack anyone who tried to hurt the children. Tom Bradley finally understood the full danger of their situation. These men were not rescuers. They were criminals who wanted to take the children for terrible reasons. "Stay away from these kids," Tom shouted, though his voice was weak from dehydration. Tom tried to position himself between the men and the children, but he was so dizzy from heat exhaustion that he could barely stand up. Marcus Johnson, the oldest boy, helped support Tom, while trying to keep the younger children behind them. But Marcus was only 14 and was also suffering from the heat. Emma Santos was still unconscious in the small patch of shade. Lucy, her best friend, knelt beside her and refused to leave, even though she was terrified of what was happening. Carlos decided to try a different approach. "Look, you don't understand," he said to Tom. "We're trying to help you, but that dog is dangerous. We need to get you away from here before it attacks." But Rex's behavior made it clear who the real danger was. The dog was calm and protective around the children, but aggressive and threatening toward Carlos and Pete. Tom may have been weakened by the heat, but he was not stupid. "If you want to help," he said, "then call the police and tell them where we are." "We don't have a phone that works out here," Pete lied. Rex could smell the deception on both men. His nose also detected something else, the scent of fear and violence that clung to people who had hurt others before. Suddenly, Rex's ears perked up. He could hear footsteps running across the desert. Maria was getting closer, following the sound of his barking. Carlos heard the footsteps too. He grabbed Pete's arm. "Someone's coming. We need to take at least some of these kids and get out of here now." Pete moved toward the group of children, but Rex immediately stepped forward and growled louder. The dog's message was clear. No one was getting past him. "I'm not afraid of some stupid dog," Pete said, raising his knife. But Rex was not just any dog. He was a trained police dog who had been taught to disarm dangerous people. When Pete raised the knife, Rex saw it as a direct threat to the children he was protecting. Rex lunged forward and grabbed Pete's wrist in his powerful jaws. Pete screamed and dropped the knife as Rex held on tightly. Carlos started to reach for his own weapon, but Rex quickly released Pete and spun around to face him. The dog's eyes were locked on Carlos, ready to attack if he made any threatening moves. Pete clutched his injured wrist and backed away. "That thing nearly broke my arm." "Shut up and help me figure out how to get past it," Carlos snapped. But their time was running out. Maria Rodriguez came running around a large rock with her gun drawn. She immediately assessed the situation. 2 dangerous men threatening a group of children, with Rex standing guard between them. "Police, nobody move," Maria shouted. "Get your hands where I can see them." Carlos and Pete froze. They had been so focused on Rex that they had not heard Maria approaching until it was too late. "We were just trying to help these people," Carlos said, trying to sound innocent. "With a knife?" Maria asked, seeing the weapon on the ground near Pete's feet. Maria kept her gun trained on the 2 men while she quickly looked at the children. She could see that several of them were in critical condition from heat exhaustion. "Rex, guard," Maria commanded. Rex positioned himself so he could watch both men while staying close to the children. His training had taught him to follow Maria's commands while protecting innocent people. "Both of you, get down on the ground, hands behind your heads," Maria ordered. Carlos and Pete looked at each other. They were trapped with no way to escape. Reluctantly, they got down on their knees and then lay flat on the desert ground. Maria quickly handcuffed both men, then immediately called for emergency medical assistance on her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We have found the missing children. I have 12 juveniles and 2 adults in critical condition from heat exhaustion. I also have 2 suspects in custody. We need immediate medical evacuation." "Copy that, Unit 47. Medical helicopters are en route to your location." Maria knelt down next to Emma Santos, the youngest child. The little girl was barely breathing, and her skin was dangerously hot. "How long has she been like this?" Maria asked Tom. "Over an hour," Tom replied weakly. "Maybe longer. I'm not sure." Maria began basic first aid, trying to cool Emma down with small amounts of water. Rex came over and gently licked the little girl's hand as if he was trying to comfort her. "Is she going to be okay?" Lucy asked, tears streaming down her face. "The doctors are coming," Maria said. "They'll take good care of her." While Maria worked with the children, she kept one eye on Carlos and Pete. Even handcuffed, she did not trust them. "What were you 2 really doing out here?" Maria asked. "We told you. We were trying to help," Carlos lied. But Maria searched their truck and found zip ties, rope, and a cooler full of drugs. "These men were definitely not good Samaritans. You're both under arrest for attempted kidnapping and possession of illegal substances," Maria said. Within 20 minutes, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. 2 medical helicopters landed in a clear area near the rocks, sending clouds of dust and sand swirling around. Paramedics quickly took over the care of the children. Emma Santos was loaded into the first helicopter along with 2 other children who were in critical condition. As the medical team worked, Rex stayed close to each child, allowing them to pet him. Somehow, the children found comfort in the gentle dog who had saved their lives. Marcus Johnson was one of the last children to be loaded into a helicopter. Before the paramedics took him away, he looked back at Rex. "Thank you," Marcus said to the dog. "You saved us." Rex wagged his tail and licked the boy's hand. Then he watched as the helicopter carried Marcus and the other children to safety. Tom, Bradley, and Frank Garcia were also airlifted to the hospital. Both men would recover, but they would never forget how close they had come to losing all 12 children. As the helicopters disappeared into the distance, Maria stood with Rex in the desert silence. Carlos and Pete sat in the back of her patrol car waiting to be transported to jail. "You did good today, boy," Maria said, scratching Rex behind the ears. Rex looked up at her with his intelligent brown eyes. He seemed to understand that they had accomplished something very important together. A backup patrol car arrived to transport Carlos and Pete to jail. As Maria watched them being driven away, she thought about how different this day could have ended. If Rex had not picked up the scent trail, the children might never have been found in time. If he had not been there to protect them from Carlos and Pete, Something terrible might have happened to them. Maria and Rex got back in their patrol car and headed home as the sun set over the Arizona desert. They had started the day with a routine patrol, but they were ending it as heroes who had saved 12 innocent lives. The desert that had nearly killed the children had also provided their salvation in the form of a police dog with an incredible nose and the courage to stand between danger and innocence. The medical helicopters flew through the desert sky toward Yuma Regional Medical Center as fast as they could go. In the first helicopter, paramedics worked frantically to save Emma Santos, the 8-year-old girl who had been unconscious for over 2 hours. Emma's body temperature was dangerously high and she was severely dehydrated. The paramedics used cooling packs and intravenous fluids to try to bring her temperature down and replace the water her body had lost. "Come on, sweetheart," one of the paramedics said as he worked. "Stay with us." In the second helicopter, 3 other children were also fighting for their lives. The heat had pushed their young bodies to the very edge of what they could survive. Marcus Johnson was conscious, but barely able to speak. He kept asking about Emma and the other children, worried about his friends even though he was sick himself. "Are they going to be okay?" Marcus whispered to the paramedic working on him. "We're doing everything we can," the paramedic replied. "You just focus on staying strong." At the hospital, doctors and nurses were waiting for the helicopters to arrive. The emergency room had been cleared and prepared for multiple patients with severe heat exhaustion. Dr. Sarah Chen was the lead emergency physician on duty. She had treated many cases of heat exhaustion over the years, but never so many children at once. "How many are coming in?" Dr. Chen asked the head nurse. 12 children and 2 adults. 3 of the children are critical, the others are stable, but dehydrated. When the first helicopter landed on the hospital roof, Dr. Chen and her team were ready. Emma Santos was rushed immediately into the emergency room. Dr. Chen quickly examined the little girl. Emma's pulse was weak and rapid, her breathing was shallow, and her skin was hot and dry. These were all signs of severe heat stroke. "Get her into the cooling room immediately," Dr. Chen ordered. "Start 2 IV lines and begin rapid fluid replacement." The medical team worked with practiced efficiency. They placed Emma in a special room where the temperature was kept very cold. They covered her with cooling blankets and used fans to bring her body temperature down safely. Emma's parents, who had been contacted by the police, arrived at the hospital just as their daughter was being treated. They were terrified when they saw how sick she looked. "Is she going to be okay?" Emma's mother asked through her tears. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Chen said. "The next few hours will be critical." In other parts of the emergency room, the rest of the children were being treated for various stages of heat exhaustion and dehydration. Most of them would recover completely with proper medical care. Marcus Johnson was conscious and talking to his parents when they arrived. Despite everything he had been through, he was more concerned about the younger children than about himself. "Mr. Tom tried so hard to keep us all safe," Marcus told his parents. "And that police dog saved our lives. If those bad men had taken us—" Marcus could not finish the sentence, but his parents understood. They held their son tightly, grateful that he was alive and safe. Tom Bradley and Frank Garcia were also being treated at the hospital. Both men felt terrible guilt about what had happened to the children under their care. "I should never have left the bus," Tom said to the police officers who came to interview him. "I put those kids in even more danger." "You made the best decision you could with the information you had," Officer Rodriguez told him. "The important thing is that everyone survived." Maria Rodriguez and Rex had come to the hospital to check on the children and to complete their report. As they walked through the emergency room, several of the children recognized Rex and called out to him. "It's the dog that saved us," Lucy shouted when she saw Rex. Dr. Chen gave permission for Rex to visit with the children for a few minutes. The gentle dog went from bed to bed, allowing each child to pet him and say thank you. The children's spirits lifted noticeably when they saw Rex. Despite everything they had been through, they smiled and laughed as they scratched behind his ears and told their parents about how brave he had been. Meanwhile, Carlos Mendez and Pete Walker were being questioned at the county jail. When police searched their backgrounds, they discovered that both men were wanted for serious crimes in other states. Carlos had been arrested multiple times for human trafficking. Pete had escaped from prison 2 years earlier and was wanted for kidnapping children in Nevada. If that dog and officer had not shown up when they did, the detective investigating the case told Maria, those children would have disappeared forever. Back at the hospital, Emma Santos was slowly responding to treatment. Her body temperature was coming down, and she was beginning to show signs of waking up. Around midnight, Emma opened her eyes for the first time in over 8 hours. The first thing she saw was her mother's face looking down at her with tears of joy. "Mommy?" Emma whispered weakly. "I'm here, baby," her mother said. "You're safe now." Emma was confused and scared. "Where am I? Where are the other kids?" "You're in the hospital," her mother explained gently. "All your friends are here too, and they're all going to be okay." Over the next few days, all 12 children recovered from their ordeal in the desert. 3 of them, including Emma, had to stay in the hospital for several days, but the doctors said they would have no lasting health problems. The story of their rescue made headlines across the country. Rex became famous as the hero dog who had saved 12 children from certain death. A week after the rescue, the church held a special ceremony to honor Rex and Officer Rodriguez. All 12 children were there, along with their families and hundreds of community members. The mayor of Phoenix presented Rex with a special medal for bravery. When they placed the medal around his neck, Rex sat perfectly still and wagged his tail as the crowd cheered. Emma Santos, who had recovered completely from her heat stroke, was chosen to speak for all the children. "Rex is the best dog in the whole world," Emma said into the microphone. "He saved our lives when those bad men wanted to hurt us. We will never forget what he did for us." After Emma's speech, all 12 children gathered around Rex for pictures. The gentle German shepherd sat patiently as they hugged him and scratched behind his ears. Maria Rodriguez was also honored for her quick thinking and professional dedication, but she was quick to point out that Rex deserved most of the credit. "I just followed where Rex led me," Maria said. "His nose and his instincts are what found those children in time." The incident led to important changes in how youth groups planned trips through remote areas. New safety rules required groups to carry GPS devices and satellite phones when traveling through desert regions. Frank Garcia, the bus driver, never drove through unfamiliar areas again without proper navigation equipment. Tom Bradley continued, working with youth but became an expert in desert survival techniques. Janet Mills, who had walked 8 miles through the desert to get help, was also honored for her courage. Her determination to find help had set the rescue operation in motion. 6 months later, Carlos Mendez and Pete Walker were convicted of attempted kidnapping and multiple other charges. They were sentenced to long prison terms and would not be able to hurt children again for many years. Rex continued working as a police dog with Officer Rodriguez. Their partnership became even stronger after their experience in the desert. They had learned that they could trust each other completely in any situation. Emma Santos sent Rex a birthday card every year on the anniversary of the rescue. She never forgot the gentle dog who had stood between her and danger when she was too weak to protect herself. The children grew up and went on to live normal, happy lives, but they all carried with them the memory of their day in the desert and the police dog who had refused to let anything bad happen to them. Rex lived to be 12 years old, which is quite old for a German shepherd. When he finally passed away, peacefully, all 12 of the children he had saved came to his memorial service. They told stories about Rex's bravery and kindness. They talked about how one dog's keen nose and brave heart had meant the difference between life and death for 12 innocent children. Maria Rodriguez retired from the police force but continued working with search and rescue teams. She trained other police dogs, always telling them about Rex and the day he saved 12 lives in the Arizona desert. The story of Rex and the lost children became legendary among police officers and search and rescue workers. It was told as an example of how animal instincts and human dedication could work together to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Years later, when Emma Santos became a teacher herself, she would tell her students about the importance of never giving up hope, even in the most difficult situations. "There are always people and animals out there who care about you," she would say. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, like a police dog with a sensitive nose and a big heart. The Arizona desert remained as beautiful and dangerous as ever. But for 12 people who had grown up to live full and happy lives, it would always be remembered as the place where they learned that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, sometimes even with 4 legs and a wagging tail.